In this demo, I will show how we can take a business process that we have already transformed through replatforming into Salesforce and identify further opportunities for improvement, specifically how we can leverage the power of Agentforce to support our users' work. Let's start from where we left it in the previous demo. We generated in the previous simulation a what-if scenario where we contemplated the idea of replatforming the case fulfillment phase of the dispute management process. Let me open the event log generated by simulating that what-if scenario. And let me focus again on the duration overlay for case fulfillment. A task that pops out is the issuance of provisional credit. This task lasts over 1 hour and provides an opportunity for further improvement. The task is performed, if I switch to the role perspective, by the case officer. We might have an opportunity to support the case officer by coupling them with some autonomous agents. To do that, we open the what-if scenario and we create a second what-if scenario. Use of Agentforce to support case officer. And what I'm going to do this time is not anymore a transformative change, but rather an incremental change in this process, and assess how the use of agents is going to impact my process, and specifically the resource utilization of the case officer. So here I have my activity issue provisional credit, which as you can see is currently performed by the case officer. So I go to my simulation parameters and add an agent as a new role. I assume the agent will work 24/7 and I start with one instance of an agent, so basically a single agent unit. I put a hypothetical cost, for example $2 an hour, and now I create a new task that is going to be entirely executed automatically by the agent. For example, I could label this task automated issuance of provisional credit. So I'm going to assign this task to my agent, and I'm going to assume that the agent is going to perform this task very quickly. It's going to provide documentation that is needed by the case officer in order to issue the provisional credit, effectively supporting the agent in their operation. So now I assume that the agent is going to work alongside the user. So for that, I need to put this automated task in a parallel block alongside the manual task that is still performed by the case officer. I set these two gateways as parallel gateways, and the last step left is to assume a reduction in the duration of the user task issue provisional credit because of the support that the credit officer is going to gain from the agent. For example, let's assume a reduction of around 66% of the duration of this task. So instead of 1.1 hour, the task is going to last 33 minutes. Of course, these are all parameters that can be modified. So now that I'm done with my so now that I've completed my what-if scenario, I can simulate it. My expectation is not necessarily that this process is going to run faster, but that I can free up capacity of the case officer so I could potentially reduce its FTEs. At the moment I have 11 case officers. I save the simulation scenario and then I go back to my workspace, and now I can see the assist, the first what-if scenario and the second one. Let me select now the first and second what-if scenarios and launch a dashboard on the fly to compare them with each other. In blue I have the what-if number 1, and in red I have the second what-if scenario. As you can see, the duration is comparable. The first scenario is taking 1.2 days, whereas the second one is taking 1.1 days, less than 10% faster than the first scenario. The cost is also comparable. But what we can see is that now with an agent that is hardly utilized, the capacity or the utilization of the case officer has further reduced. So now I can go back to my simulation scenario and try to reduce the FTEs of the case officers to see how much can I reduce the FTE of this role without impacting the performance, thanks to the support of the agent. For example, instead of 11 FTEs, let's try with about half, that is 5 FTEs. So we can simulate again, and we are going once again to compare this scenario with the previous scenario that we just simulated. I select the second what-if scenario and the latest scenario that I've just simulated, where I assume to reduce the FTEs of the case officer down to 5. Let me launch a dashboard and compare once again the two scenarios. We can see that the duration has remained pretty much the same, 1.1 days versus 1.19 days, which is in fact very close to the 1.2 days that I had in the first what-if scenario after replatforming. I have now increased the capacity of the case officer, and there is still room to keep decreasing the FTEs without affecting the overall performance of this process, thanks to autonomous agents working alongside users. As a final step, I can now ask GenAI to generate a natural language description of this end-to-end business process that I can use as input to train my agent on the context within which this agent will operate. Furthermore, I could use task mining to discover the actual process performed by the user, credit officer, in activity issue provisional credit. Optimize that through simulation if required, and then generate through GenAI a natural language description of the process inside the task that I could use as input to train the agent on the actual task they are supposed to perform. To recap, the use of simulation in combination with Agentforce has allowed me to understand where best to place agents within my process, assess their impact on the process performance, but also on my ability to reduce the FTEs of my users that could be reallocated to more value-adding activities.